You're listening to Death of the Reader. Flex and Herds here for your Murder Mystery World Tour, and we are here in our fourth week discussing interactive fiction, and our second week discussing Lucas Pope's Return of the Obra Dinn. Herds has gone all the way through to the end of the game, including the extra chapter bargain that you get for getting everything right. And Herds, super excited to be joined by Lucas Pope today, later in the show. Stick around for that. And Herds, I just wanted to kind of ask, off the bat.
Always.
Talking about bargain, because it's a chapter wherein we finish the game, a year passes, and you receive a package from Henry Evans, the doctor.
That smells bad.
Yeah,
let's be clear.
who sends you the book in the first place. He resends you the book along with a monkey's paw.
Yeah, well, it's like you wish for something on the monkey's paw. The traditional story is that the monkey's paw has 3 fingers up, or however many fingers, and when you wish for something on the monkey's paw, it comes true, but in the worst way possible. It's like an awful curse. Like you get all the donuts you can eat, but you have to eat them all at once and you die. And you get this monkey's paw in I was about to say Papers, Please. In The Return of the Obra Dinn. I've got it on the brain. We have to talk about that. But in The Return of the Obra Dinn, you get this monkey's paw, and I loved the moment when I was playing this, and I said, is this the literal monkey's paw? And it was. It's beautiful. Mm-hmm. And you're able to use the compass watch, which is the property of Mr. Henry Evans, the surgeon on the ship, which is a great little lore detail because you can imagine he'd use it on people who died because he's the doctor in a murder mystery. So he could tell you how they die with the watch. It's a lovely little murder mystery trope kind of explained with supernatural means, which I love. But you get to use the watch on this monkey's paw, which puts you into the lazarette.
The one area of the ship you couldn't enter the whole game.
And so you use this monkey's paw, use the compass on the paw to see the moment where Henry Evans is talking like, I'm about to do something not very good, and he shoots this monkey so that he can, because he understands the mechanics of the compass watch, he can use that monkey's body, because it's like on a leash. He uses it so he can access the lazarette and figure out what happened in there and pass that information along.
Yeah, it's a really great scene. Someone, while we were streaming the game online, asked us in chat, what was the worst death in the whole game? And I said, I can't answer that question just yet, because the poor monkey definitely has the most, I guess, unnecessary would be the word.
Yeah, although notably, and this is something I'm a bit miffed at myself for missing, when you get to the escape chapter when Henry Evans is actually escaping from the boat, he doesn't have his monkey with him.
That he does not.
Funny that detail.
Yeah.
Very clever.
It's very good and is an excellent example of how the story shows you absolutely everything you need to know. Yes. For example, during the bargain chapter, the actual bargain we see is the Captain Robert Whitterall bargaining with the mermaids to send the Kraken away and to bring the Obra Dinn home safely, which it is implied that the glowing star you see in the ocean off the side of the ship is one of the mermaids who brought the ship back to Falmouth.
We probably shouldn't call it a star because it is underwater or on the water's edge. You can imagine the mermaid is peeking up over the water, and both that shimmer out on the water and also whenever you see one of the shells during the murder flashbacks. Yeah. They all kind of have that same shine to them.
And I think the really fun thing about this chapter is that it does a great job of showing you the concurrent events that are happening. For example, Philip Dahl, we see die locked up there with the Formosan box after several characters on the ship have lost their marbles, and some people have gone out and tried to take the Formosan box to sea, which is supposedly what called the mermaids there in the first place.
Yeah.
We get to see, for example, when the captain is down there bargaining with the mermaids, the ship's tilted over and you hear the crashing of things above deck, implying that the moment in the very first scene of Doom, which was the 4th scene in the entire game, where the captain's wife calls out, I want my husband, Martin, where is he? That when she gets crushed by rigging, it is the same moment that the captain is down below deck trying to save the ship.
It's really cool from a kind of thematic point of view that this captain's actions are fruitless, especially as he's one of the first characters presented in the game. You kind of expect the captain to be responsible for everything that happens on the ship.
Yeah.
And in that moment, he is sort of implied to be that his stabbing of the mermaid, the idea that those two actions are interlinked, that perhaps the Kraken is growing more ferocious and more vicious.
Yeah.
As it is sensing that these mermaids are in trouble, that they're dying on the ship, which I think is it's a really cool through line there.
It does a fantastic job. And as we were talking about last week in terms of the impact of the individual moments, the spectacle of seeing those still shots all of the spectacle that is still etched in your brain because of how memorable each scene has been then comes back around later in the game in a way that you wouldn't really expect because of how bizarre the bargain chapter is, where it fits in fictionally in the story.
I will say, I have one disappointment, one major disappointment, Flex, that I have to confess.
By all means, sir.
There is a character who, for some perspective here, the captain is in 13 plus the 2 scenes that he's in the lazarette, so 15 scenes in the entire game.
Yes, just in case you've missed it, in the list of characters, you can click on them to see how many scenes across the whole game they're in.
No, I counted them. That's not true. I'm not that dedicated. The captain is, in the end, in 15, despite being a major player. The third mate is in like 10.
Yeah.
There is a character who is in 17 scenes, easily the highest of any character. His name is Henry Brennan. He's one of the characters who tries to mutiny against the captain at the end of their story. And he's there like right at the beginning too. He's in a whole bunch of really important scenes. And yet we never see him like have an arc, I suppose.
I don't know. The thing with Brandon, I completely agree. He's a very simple character, but also out of a cast of 60 with so many well-painted characters, I do like that, at least from the game design perspective, Brennan is a more simple, easy to understand way to follow who's who in the story.
For sure.
Like the midshipmen, I think, are probably one of the best examples of a narrative going in the game, because you mentioned last week on the show that we get to see Charlie have this journey from being a wimp to sacrificing himself. But they're also very difficult to figure out in the sense that, first of all, you have to actually realize that you need to look at the ship map and which room one of them crawls in to die to figure out which job they have on the ship.
For sure.
Then you have to figure out which one of the 3 they each are based on a line of dialogue that feels quite throwaway.
I do want to say, on the more positive side of things, it's a bit of a jab there at the old Pope man, but I do like the fact that none of the characters, because when you think of murder mysteries, when murder mysteries get put in a film or in plays, I feel like a sort of stereotype is that all the characters are wearing like very ostentatious garbs and like very visibly identifiable from each other. But this story sort of takes the opposite approach, where if you're just looking at those crowd shots, like you cannot tell like which character is which. Like none of them are wearing like a feathered hat. Like they have hats to indicate their rank, the captain and their mates and the mate stewards and such. Yeah. But like most of the characters aren't wearing anything to immediately set them out from every other 59 characters.
I do think, though, that is counteracted by your ability to zoom in on the character and see where they are in the portrait. That is essentially if a text-based murder mystery had an option where you could highlight a moment a character was speaking and it would highlight their name in the character list for you.
How handy would that be?
It would be extremely handy.
If you could just have a book that was like every line from an individual character was like color coded the same way or something, that'd be handy.
It would. Anyhow, you're listening to Death of the Reader. For the rest of the show today, we are going to be joined by Lucas Pope talking about some of the decisions, history, and influences that went into this game. Stick around for that. We're super excited for this chat. We are talking all the way to the end of Return of the Obra Dinn. You're on to SER 107.3. You're listening to Death of the Reader. Flex and Herds here with you, and today we are talking about Return of the Obra Dinn, a supernatural murder mystery set in the 19th century concerning a mysterious, deadly ghost ship, and we're joined by the man himself, Mr. Lucas Pope, the game developer responsible for this beastly work of interactive fiction. Lucas, it's so good to have you. Welcome to Death of the Reader.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
So, you've made 2 high-profile games, soon to be 3, that revolve around making mundane paperwork more interesting. Why are you so dedicated to giving your players another job?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. I think ultimately, I enjoy that kind of game. I enjoy managing paper. I don't know why, but that's comes out into my games. It's probably just some OCD thing. Probably mechanically, it's easy for me to understand. Kind of like filling out a game like that is sort of like filling out a matrix. You decide the edges first, and it's kind of easy, and then you just have to go in and fill in all the cells later. And that kind of works in well with when you're coming up with the mechanics as you're coming up with the story and kind of mixing them and weaving them together and trying to get them to complement each other in interesting ways. It helps me to have that sort of structure of bureaucracy, basically, or just very strict, kind of boring, mundane tasks.
Yeah, so when you're coming up with a game idea, obviously it's like a lightning bolt. That's how it's portrayed in all the movies. So I assume that's how you experience it. Do you kind of come up with the mechanics first? Like, did you have the idea for a magical compass that'll let you see the past before you came up with the idea of the Obra Dinn, or what was a chicken and egg situation? What's going on there?
Yeah, for Obra Dinn, it was a little different. I came up with the visual style first. I wanted to make this 3D 1-bit game, basically. And I played around with a few ideas or concepts and ended up on this basically tall ship that had gone missing and came back. I felt like as a one person dev team, I could model a ship and handle that level of production, basically. That turned out to be pretty wrong. It was a lot more work than I expected. But at that point, I'd already committed to the concept. And I I had some of the basic ideas. Like I knew I work mostly from restrictions. So I knew I couldn't have things moving around and animating. I couldn't have this kind of expensive cutscenes or amazing effects and things like that. So the tools I had to work with were very limited. And so I didn't have a whole lot of the game planned out when I just threw together a scene or two, one or two flashbacks, and kind of put a couple characters in there, put some dialogue in there, set them up in a way. It was all very rough, but it was enough for me to look at this and say, I could make a whole game out of this. What I have here, there's enough little pieces and potential to twist some things together that make it interesting. And that was pretty early in Obra Dinn, which is good because it gave me confidence through the whole project. It was a very long project. But the whole time I always felt like these pieces of game that I have, that you could make a good game out of them. I can't guarantee that I will actually find that game, but at least there's a potential here for something cool.
Now, obviously, Lucas, a huge draw of this game is the way that you use terrifying monsters. The mystery of what happened to the ship's crew on the Obra Dinn is contrasted with the raw truth of the beasts that seem to appear from nowhere to deliver judgment on them. These events are clearly inspired by classic seafaring myths. Why did you choose the open ocean over other facets of monster mythology like spooky castles or isolated mountain peaks?
The other idea I had was an Egyptian tomb. So I mean, it wasn't like I magically picked this one immediately. I don't know. There's a lot of good mythology there. There's a lot of, when I decided to sort of set it here, I did a lot of research on reading lots of books and true accounts of accidents at sea and things like that, and a lot of fiction too. And there's just a lot of interesting material there, basically. It's just a lot to go on. And I really wanted to kind of go hard on the nautical terminology and the sort of situational effects of being on a ship like that, and the way that crews worked back then. A lot of things that I discovered in the research that I felt like weren't really represented that much and could make really interesting parts to the game that would be easy to kind of slide in there and also add a lot more rich sort of accoutrement to the story, to the game. A lot of what I do is trying to figure out how not to do stuff. So how can I put the least amount of spice on the dish so that it tastes good and the people who are eating it kind of envision it as something better than it really is. When you deal with sea mythology and sea stories, there's a lot to work with there in that sense.
I mean, we were talking last week on the show with local author B. Michael Radburn about that concept, about the idea that the players or the reader's imagination will go further than anything that you could show them in terms of horror. And I think the great example in this game is those freeze frame death scenes. That's kind of the main spectacle of it. As I said, there's so much spectacle to it, but you also show a great amount of restraint in how the scenes are constructed. We never get to see certain details of the monsters. We never get to see the Kraken's heads, and all of the actions of the characters feel so grounded. Like the ship's cook springs to mind because they're murdered just because they wanted to try cooking up a new meal. How do you blend a story that has such a peak of implausibility with these moments of mundane character? How do you make sure nothing feels out of proportion?
Well, I mean, if you're talking about me, I just wing it and got lucky, basically. Yeah, I think like just in general, when it comes to writing stories, I try to keep things more grounded. I decided on eventually having 60 characters, and I needed to kill 60 people or 50 people in interesting ways. At some point, it was clear, okay, I got to do something more than just people stabbing each other or guys fighting. There's got to be some cool monsters that sort of are revealed at some point. There was an interesting challenge to tell the story in a way, just to these little snippets of memories, 30 seconds here and 10 seconds there, in a way that was interesting, and the player could sort of piece everything together only when someone dies. That's already a challenge right there. I can only tell a story when somebody's dying. So people have to be dying left and right, but it has to feel kind of natural. It can't be that crazy. And so you put some fantasy creatures in there, some monsters in there, and suddenly, it feels a little more natural that people are dying more often.
Yeah, I thought that was really fun because this essentially, I think of everything we've covered on the show, doing murder mystery fiction from all around the world, this is the story that has the highest body count. And there's so much that's clearly kind of come out of the limitations that you had for yourself to put in those details. And I think it's really fascinating how many characters on the ship get a fully realized story when all we really have is, 60 or less scenes of just people dying, these short miniature narratives that go on where we get to see the third mate traveling around the ship with his steward in the lead up to their death.
Yeah, I started with just fleshing out, just getting the story down, getting the progression down. The one tricky part is the player kind of experiences the game in reverse, and they have to meet these corpses, these bodies, to see the new elements of the story in the right order as they sort of get down lower decks on the ship. Sequentially, I had to introduce new corpses in a way that sort of directed the player through the ship, and they made some progress that way. And so just making that all tie together with the number of deaths and the kinds of deaths was the hardest part. If I was smarter, what I would have done is I would have made a game similar to this on, say, a little skiff that was 17 people or 12 people running the thing. And then each scene could have been a lot more detailed, or maybe it would have been a shorter game, or maybe there were other things to make it longer. But basically, when I decided I was going to do this sort of tall ship of this size, which needs something like 120 crew to actually run it, and I kept cutting that down until finally it was at 60. And I was like, okay, 60 I can handle. 60 took me 4.5 years to handle. So if I could have gotten that down even lower, I think I could have kept a lot of the good things about the game, but just made it way easier to actually make. And by the time I shipped the game, I was so totally sick of working on it that I didn't care if it was not playable or not, or if people got stuck,
my
basically.
Goodness.
Yeah, I got lucky that it worked out, but I was so done with the game at that point.
When I played the game, I felt that I would kind of wait to see if I would get clues about characters that I knew had already exited the story, because you're playing backwards, obviously, in earlier chapters of the game. For me, the mechanic, once I figured out how it worked, of the characters in the picture, their faces become clearer when you believe that we have enough clues to figure out who that person is. And for me, the way I kind of internalized that was that Mr. Popia has given us all the clues that we're going to get. And so once that face becomes clear, I should look back through the chapter that I've, just read, or the chapters that I've already read, to try and find that character's identity. I feel like that mechanic in particular, it really stood out to me as being the most helpful.
I think the other thing that stood out to me is, based on talking with other people in our audience who've played the game, so many people who've experienced this story just have learned the cast top to bottom. Like, one of the side effects of the way that you've asked people to pick apart and look at the small details of these stories means that even years after some people in our audience have played the game, they still know every character in the cast by name. And when we were poking and asking questions, would be able to recite entire scenes in ways that was really I think it's kind of special that you're able to build rapport with your players where they have that distinctive a memory of the experience you gave them.
Yeah, I think that's actually one of the things I'm most proud about the game. And I didn't really realize this myself. I live with these characters and I wrote these characters, so it wasn't that special to me. But watching someone play, and then they were talking about all the characters in a way that they really knew them pretty well. I realized that you can see, you play this game for a little bit, and then you see one of the characters, and this game looks bad. It's low resolution. You cannot see things very clearly, actually. It's hard to see characters, but still, if you play the game for a while, you can see one of those characters from behind across the ship, and you can kind of know who he is. And that really surprised me. It came natural to me because like I said, I made these guys, but when I saw my wife kind of in that same mode where she could recognize these characters from behind, in the distance, in the dark, in this really low resolution 1-bit style, I don't know. I thought, yeah, wow, I got lucky with that too. Yeah. Jesus.
I read somewhere that you randomly generated the bodies of the characters. Is that right? Before sculpting,
sort of.
Do you want to walk us through that process?
What I did was I randomly generated these kind of types of head shapes, basically, and then I would click through a button to look at the results. And if I saw a head that looked kind of good, and this is just a shape, the geometry. If I saw a kind of head shape that looked good, I would set that aside and then create an actual head out of it and then paint it by hand afterwards. A lot of all the dress and the way these characters look is all informed by old photographs. Those are kind of too late, but drawings and things like that of these guys. And there's just a lot of interesting media about a ship like this, the kinds of crew that they had, and the kinds of people that were there, and the roles that each one of them had, and the kind of lifestyle they had. And that was one of the things I thought was really interesting, is a way to create kind of cliques with these guys. They were all different stratas of class on these ships. And, the lower class guys would stay together, the middle class and the higher class. But in the end, they're all together on this boat in the middle of the ocean, and they're all kind of responsible for surviving. And the situation is so dire and so risky and so dangerous all the time that they kind of have to come together in ways that you wouldn't really expect this different class of people to come together, and different nationalities too. Making the player pay attention to that stuff, I thought was nice too.
Yeah, I suppose one of the other things that's been pretty divisive that we actually really loved is that one of the twists of the game is once you've reached the end and gotten all the fates, you're rewarded with the bargain chapter that purports to explain any lingering questions, but actually raises more questions than it answers. Why reward players with more ambiguity when that's actually kind of bound to let some people down?
Man, I was so happy with the way the game ended when I was making it. I struggled with the way to end the game for a really long time. The solution was the monkey, basically. I added a monkey, and then I realized I could end this game on a monkey's paw. And like that, for a mystery story, I can't think of a better ending than a monkey's paw.
No, it's
perfect.
The moment of realization, I think we both had. We played through the game separately.
Before it was revealed. It was like with the bundle that smelled off. I was like, it's the monkey's paw. It's the monkey. It's happening.
It's so great.
Yeah, so I mean, I was really proud of that. And it's only until after the game was released and people were like super disappointed in the ending that I realized that, you know what, I built it up too much. To me, the mystery was the sort of the book. How did you get the book, and what was going on? Could you do this stuff? And the reveal that one of the guys on the ship had the watch the whole time and knew how to use it, to me, sort of like opened up everything into this much more interesting story. But it's too obscure, actually. I don't think a lot of players get that the surgeon had the watch the whole time, knew how to use it. You wonder, like, why didn't he use it more? And, well, that's kind of, okay, that does ask a lot more questions, but to me, it makes it pretty interesting. When I was making the game, I came up with the idea of the watch pretty early. Okay, so you have this magic watch, and you can go back in time, and you can see what happened when somebody died. And there was a very careful balancing act to make the player care about the story in the game and not the watch, to care about the mystery on the boat and not the watch. Because realistically, if you got that watch, and I've said this before, you would get right back on the boat, the little boat, and you would go right back into shore, and you would rule the world with that watch. And so I needed to kind of turn the light off the watch for as much as I could, because I had some cool ideas about interacting with things in the memories or seeing things in the memories in a way that would, blow your mind with how cool the watch was. But at the same time, if I had done that, then this mystery about mermaids and treasure is like, okay, pedestrian, basically, compared to what the kind of potential of the watch. And I wasn't going to change the mermaids and the treasure. So, okay, that means the watch has to get kind of downplayed. But at least what I can do is at the very end, I can kind of open the door a little bit and show the player kind of what was going on. That whole time you were solving this mystery, there was a guy there who knew everything about the watch, had the watch with him, and has passed that to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think we were both incredibly happy with it. We're always a big fan. Despite reading Murder Mystery, we're always a big fan of ambiguous endings, and I thought that the way that you blended the kind of supernatural ambiguity of what was going on with the mermaids and the shells and the Formosan box compared to the very finite but, perhaps not clear to everyone story about the stopwatch and the doctor was just such a beautiful culmination of all of the ideas. Because as you say, the stopwatch is the most powerful thing in the game, despite all of these, horrid monsters and seafaring myths that we've dealt with across the story.
Yeah, thank you.
I really like the idea that the surgeon of all people is the person who has the watch, because you could just, it's interesting because he could be responsible for killing people on the ship with these bad surgeon work, and he's the one who's responsible for figuring out how people died. That gives him a certain level of authority, I would think. That's a bit questionable.
Yeah. There's a really cool vibe that I got from reading these true stories of shipwrecks and things like that from the period, and they're all written by the survivors. So every one of those guys that survived was super vicious. Not vicious. They really only looked out for themselves. And that's because if they didn't, then they wouldn't be the one who got back and told the story. And they were all very practical. And so that was kind of my vision for everybody on the ship, but especially the surgeon. It's just very practical. Like, he knows how powerful those watch is. He's not going to go back and fix things. He's not going to go back and solve mysteries. Maybe he does, actually. Maybe he did. But he's not going to tell anyone that he knows, because that's only gotten him in trouble before. And I'm just not going to use it for that. And it's this kind of like life is cheap mentality that was very prevalent at the time, that he's not going to stick his neck out to save someone else's life. And that's all based on just reading these stories written from the time.
I think one of the really interesting things, just to cap off here with Obra Dinn, it's become so much of an instant modern classic. You know, it definitely has that indie edge where, you know, there's the weird decisions you've made and the things that probably aren't perfect, but I think everyone I hear talk about this game has a sense of reverence in that it is such a defined particular experience that's so satisfying to go through. And even if you are frustrated with the ending, even if you are frustrated with the mechanics, I don't think I know anyone who's touched this game who will ever forget the experience they had with it. And that's so awesome to me that a game that's so recent has had such an impact, at least with all of the circles that I communicate with, in being this memorable.
How's your ego doing, Lucas?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. Holding up.
Good. I'm glad.
Like, just choosing the visual style, I think was a good move in that sense, because you look at that and you know that you're going to get something weird. And so I think I got a lot of latitude from people who play the game just by looking at it. They know that, okay, this part is weird and this part sucks and it's not fun, but I kind of knew that because it looks weird. You know, it looks like it's going to be hard to play. So there's a kind of filter on there's a gate that you have to go through that I think puts players in a better mood for the kind of bullshit that I pull during the whole game. So it just kind of works out. It gets lucky. It's why, you know, I can never make kind of a mainstream sort of game, I think, because I would just screw it up in ways that people would be really unhappy with.
You have that base level expectations that you can't hit, but if you go a completely different angle, you're fine. You know, that's what
basically.
I get it.
All right, I love it. Lucas, thank you so much for joining us here on Death of the Reader. It has been an absolute pleasure speaking with you and getting the chance to play through Obra Dinn for the show.
Yeah, thanks, guys. My pleasure, absolutely.
We are discussing Lucas Pope's Return of the Obra Dinn all the way through to the end. We'll be back with more of that in just a second. You're listening to Death of the Reader here on 2SER 107.3. You're listening to Death of the Reader. Thanks so much for joining us today. Lucas Pope there talking about Return of the Obra Dinn with us, his wonderful mystery game where you are an insurance assessor aboard the good ship Obra Dinn, mysteriously returned to Falmouth with no crew. And it is up to you to go and figure out what happened to all of them. I hope you enjoyed getting to hear that extended discussion with Lucas Pope. I figured it was the most interesting way to bring you all of the things we wanted to share about this game. The last thing I wanted to direct you towards today before we finish this discussion is that up online on Lucas Pope's YouTube channel, and I'll link this on the podcast, is a full 50-minute time lapse of Lucas Pope putting together the dioramas.
Heck yeah.
From the Return of the Obra Dinn. It is such a gem to watch. I think if you enjoyed the game and how it is constructed, which is definitely to me one of the most interesting parts of the game.
I think it's the most interesting. I'm gonna go out and put my opinion there.
Yeah, it is well worth taking a look at, because all in all, despite any complaints that we'd have, this is a masterful piece of interactive mystery fiction that, despite breaking many of the traditional text-based rules of mystery fiction, does an excellent job of still being fair to you as a player in mechanizing exactly what you need to do to fill out the list of this cast and hear the whole story.
Yeah. There's 20 heckin' murderers in this story. Yeah. It's great. Anyway.
Lucas Pope's Return of the Obra Dinn is an excellent piece of interactive fiction, and I'm absolutely overjoyed that we got to experience it here on the show, and I hope that you get the chance to check it out or watch us playing it
But we must move on.
We must.
To new and uncharted territories. We're going to be doing something a little bit different. We're going to look at interactive, a sort of interactive murder mystery. We're going to have you look at Rooster Teeth's Dead Little Roosters.
Yes.
The third installation in their Little Roosters series.
Yep, there was 11 Little Roosters, which was a little spy thriller before this, and then the original was 10 Little Roosters, which was very much then, and then there were none nod. Next week on the show, we will be doing episodes 1 to 6 of Dead Little Roosters.
We really should just do a proper ARG at some point. That's really what we should just do. We're getting closer to it.
Closer.
I can feel it. It's on the tip of my tongue.
Alrighty, you're listening to Death of the Reader here on 2SER 107.3, your Murder Mystery World Tour. This has been Lucas Pope's Return of the Obra Dinn, and we will see you next time.